clipping or saturation. In this video, I'm gonna break down these concepts as simply as possible, starting from the basics, from terms and their meanings, and then we'll move on to the theory and finalize with the tools and what to focus on when working with them. Clipping is a term that originated from analog electronics and sound physics. The essence of clipping is that when signal exceeds allowable amplitude limits, its peaks are clipped. This can happen in both analog and digital contexts, though today the term is more often associated with digital distortion, so when the signal crosses the digital zero. In this case, part of the information is lost and the distortions become audible, often referred to as clipping or distortion. So if clipping introduces distortion, let's look at the pure distortion or a square wave. A square wave is a signal that alternates instantly between maximum and minimum amplitude with no in-between. It only contains odd harmonics, like first, third, fifth, and so on, and has a harsh, aggressive sound. When a signal is heavily distorted, for example with hard clipping, its shape starts to resemble a square wave, as the signal's peaks gets flattened. By changing the signal's shape, distortion also changes its harmonic structure. Let's see what that is. Here I've got a bass track open in isotope RX. Right now you could see the harmonics it contains, or it would be our harmonic structure. Let's remove the fundamental tone, then the second and third harmonics one by one, and listen to the differences. Let's cut the fundamental frequency first. So, what do we hear? Well, the bass still sounds like the bass. And if you were listening in headphones or small speakers, you maybe haven't noticed much difference. In fact, maybe you haven't noticed the difference at all. So our first conclusion will be is that our ears recognize the instruments by its harmonics, even when the fundamental tone that carries our note is missing. Now let's skip the fundamental and cut out the second harmonic. Now the bass feels like it lost its body. It's less weighty. The second harmonic in bass helps it to carry its energy on mid-size and smaller speakers. Remember, harmonics aren't just copies of the fundamental. They are independent parts of the sound that make it what it is. Now, let's try bringing back the second harmonic with a saturation tool. Here we go, 40 dB. Any difference? Not much. Let's add another 40. And still not much. Unfortunately, the saturation tool can't guess what was supposed to be there. Next, let's cut the third harmonic and see what happens. The third harmonic gives the bass clarity and ability to translate on the smallest devices. Without it, it sounds too muddy. Conclusion 2. Harmonics also affect translatability. so how well your sound is played by many other devices. Sometimes you'll come across samples where the bass is lacking, say, second harmonic, so the producer of the sample pack would just cut it, so he wanted to layer it afterwards. But when this bass, without layering, comes to the mixing stage, the problems arise and you cannot really solve them. Conclusion 3. These harmonics that sounds would naturally contain are what you see behind the EQ bands, so you can adjust them to your favor. Conclusion 4. Pay attention to your source material, because the saturation won't make a good guitar out of bad one. The harmonic structure that you get with an instrument is the answer to the question why one guitar costs $100 and the other one would cost a couple of thousand. And a small note. This principle applies to all sounds, not only bass guitar, it can be violin, vocal, just anything you can imagine. Okay, why we did this experiment? We did it to kind of cover the question how the harmonics that come from distortion are related to the ones that the sounds already have. Distortion harmonics are added to the existing ones, creating new overtones rather than copying the harmonic structure of the original signal. Your distortion tool will work with the part of the signal that you feed to it, not just the fundamental frequency. Now let's look at some distortion tools. What is a saturator? People often confuse saturators with soft clippers and wave shapers, so let's start from a wave shaper. A wave shaper is a simple function that defines an output for each input value, and you can draw this function however you like. For example, the famous Oxford inflator is a wave shaper. Now, the soft clipper. The soft clipper is a type of wave shaper, but with a specific function. Below a certain level, the signal passes through as is. Above another level, it's hard limited, and there is clipping. In between, there is a smooth transition, the knee, where the signal is gradually limited. A soft clipper shapes the signal only if it crosses into the limiting zone. Now the saturator. If the clipper's job is to limit the signal, then the saturator's job is to enhance sound with harmonics, making it sound fuller and giving it more clarity. Is a soft clipper saturator? Well, yes, but typically saturators are expected to add pleasant sounding harmonics, not too many and not too few like an ear candy. What about hard clipping? The hard clipping would introduce that pure distortion when the signal reaches the threshold. Can I compare the hard clipping to a distortion pedal? Guitar pedals often combine clipping with filtering, giving the sound a specific tone. The result is more pronounced dirty distortion. Following the same logic, the soft clipping would be an overdrive pedal. We'll have one example later in the video. Before we make another experiment, to see how all these distortion tools would affect our harmonic structure, I will give you some adjectives so you can intuitively understand what happens when you blend them in. Even harmonics add warmth and give a sense of smoothness, sometimes adding a touch of dirt, making the sound feel more natural and rounded. They're responsible for that fatness and fullness. On the other hand, odd harmonics would give you sharpness and emphasize brightness, making the sound more piercing. They can make it feel aggressive or even harsh, giving a certain clarity but also a raw, edgy quality if overemphasized. Let's take a 1 kHz sine wave and try distorting it with both clippers and saturator. Starting with hard clipping, as we lower the threshold, we get lots of distortion. Hard clipping adds brightness and creates many high harmonics. These new highs fill the spectrum and make the sound brighter and more aggressive. Switching to soft clipping, we see this region smooth out. That's why these soft clipper distortions feel softer. Also, you can see that both soft and hard clipping doesn't introduce any even harmonics, so you can also describe them as clean. No warmness also means no dirt. Now let's try out a saturator. Often you'll see these two words in color boxes, triode and pentode. These are just types of tubes from the analog or the real world, so many plugins would emulate them. So in any plugin you'll find these, The triode sound is softer and richer in low harmonics, while the pentode has more pronounced highs and is more aggressive. A triode provides the second harmonic, adding warmth and subtle dirt until pushed too far, when a pentode behaves more like a clipper, adding only odd harmonics. In general, these color boxes may offer both in various mixes. For example, a transformer from a console might give you both even and odd harmonics, with the odd ones being a bit louder. Let's do a quick summary. The clippers are mainly used for clean signal limiting, when on the other hand, saturators are more for color and tone shaping. Let's end with a snare example. Here is a snare that's recorded with one mic and is already gated. Usually you wanna use two microphones because the top plastic gives punch and low end, while the bottom plastic gives brightness and body. This snare lacks the body to it, so let's try to find it. We start with a clipper in a hard mode, kinda to trade a bit of transient for some body. It seems to be louder now, or brighter, but as you can see it peaks lower than before, so its dynamic range is reduced, but the perceived loudness increased. In deeper clipping, the attack starts to disappear, and does it sound more full? I wouldn't say so. Switching to the soft clipper. The snare feels closer to what I wanted, but it's still too bright. Now let's try saturating it with a green screamer or a tube screamer pedal. I'm cranking the drive to 100% so it sounds more like distortion. Blending in some little percent of distortion will act as a gentle saturation. So now the snare feels more like a full drum, and the punch remains. The difference between green screamer distortion and the distortion you get from hard clipper is that the pedal has the higher harmonics filtered out. Here I'm gonna use the same device to do measuring, just to prove that saturation also reduces dynamic range as clipper or compressor does. There are also a genre standards, so to speak. In modern hip-hop, a gritty clipper on master bass sets the vibe for the whole song, when in more organic genres there is a place for a warm tube or something. I also want to caution you that to work effectively with distortion, it's good to hear it. That is, having a good monitoring that can accurately reproduce the effects. On small or low quality speakers, it's easy to overdo it with saturation or just to clip too much of your low end, for example. So, now you know a bit more about what each tool does and what to listen for to make a better decision. In the end, the deciding factor is still your ears, and the main rule still stands. If it sounds good, then it's good. That was it. See you in the next video. Bye.